That morning, I moved the armchair 3 feet to the left, toward the window. The light was better there. I'd been meaning to do it for 2 weeks. My house, my chair, my light. Jennifer was at the kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling through her phone. I dragged the armchair across the hardwood. It made a sound like a long, slow exhale, and set it down facing the window. "Mom." Mark measured that spot. "I know." He measured it 3 times, with an actual compass. "I know that too." She looked up, looked at the chair, looked at me. "He's going to notice." "Of course he will." She opened her mouth, closed it, went back to her phone. I sat in the armchair. The morning light came through clean and even, exactly where I needed it. I opened my book. 22 years I'd lived in this house. Bought it the year Jennifer started middle school, after Gerald passed, and I needed something that was just mine. Paid it off in 11 years. Every room, every window, every squeaky floorboard, mine. Mark Cashman had been living here for 14 months. 14 months of compasses and crystals and something called wealth flow axes that apparently ran directly through my living room furniture. 14 months of my reading chair pushed into corners, my kitchen herbs relocated because rosemary disrupts the southern channel, my late husband's engineering awards quietly removed from the wall because, and I'm quoting here, achievement trophies create competitive energy that blocks abundance. I'd been patient. I'm a patient woman. 30 years in infrastructure engineering will do that to you. You learn that the ground shifts slowly and you plan accordingly. I turned a page. The garage door opened at 7:42. Mark's footsteps were always heavy. Not angry heavy, just the footsteps of a man who believed the floor should feel him coming. He'd built 3 used car dealerships from nothing. And honestly, fair enough. He knew how to walk into a room. He walked into the living room, stopped. I didn't look up from my book. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "Eleanor." "Good morning, Mark." "The chair." "Yes." "It was positioned on the north-northeast node. I calibrated that placement specifically. The incoming wealth flow runs directly through that quadrant. I had a practitioner verify it last month. That wasn't a cheap consultation." "I needed the light for reading." "You needed the—" "Eleanor, this isn't about reading. This is about energy architecture. You can't just move load-bearing elements of a flow system because you want to read." I looked up at him then. He was in his good suit, charcoal gray, the one he wore for serious meetings. Briefcase in one hand, face doing the thing it did when he was working very hard to sound reasonable. Load-bearing. Energetically load-bearing, yes. "Mark, I've designed load-bearing systems, bridges, overpasses, a petroleum pipeline that runs 460 miles through 3 states. I understand what load-bearing means." "That's structural engineering. This is energy engineering. Different discipline entirely." Don't me. I had a deal closing today, significant deal, a fleet purchase, corporate account, and I walked in this morning already feeling the misalignment from the driveway. Something was off. Now I see why. Jennifer had gone very still at the kitchen table. The chair being near the window caused your deal to fall through? The disruption of the flow node created negative friction in my negotiation bandwidth. Yes, that's how this works. I've explained this. I've explained this multiple times, and you sit there with that look. What look? That look. Like I'm an idiot. Like everything I've built means nothing because I didn't do it with a slide rule. I set my book down carefully. Spine up, page marked. I don't think you're an idiot. I think you're a good salesman who got sold something. The room went quiet. Jennifer stood up from the table, quietly, the way she'd been standing up and leaving rooms since she was 16 years old. Excuse me? I said, I heard what you said. I heard it fine. You know what, Eleanor? I've been nothing but respectful in this house. I've tried to include you. I've explained my system. I've been patient. I have bent over backwards to make you comfortable. This is my house, Mark. I know it's your... He stopped. Reset, straightened his jacket. I'm aware of the legal situation. The legal situation? You live here. We support you. We pay the utilities, we buy the groceries, we maintain the property. Jennifer and I have built our lives around making sure you're taken care of, and the very least you could do is not sabotage the energy work I've put into this space, in my home. There it was. Not our home, not the house, my home. I looked at him for a long moment. He held eye contact, confident. He thought he'd landed something. Jennifer was standing in the kitchen doorway. She wasn't looking at Mark. She was looking at me. And I recognized her expression. I'd seen it on engineers at project reviews, the ones who'd spotted an error in the calculations and were waiting to see if anyone else would catch it. She'd caught it. I picked up my book. You're right, Mark. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about this all wrong. He blinked. You have? I've been approaching your system with a linear mindset, two-dimensional. That's a surveyor's error. What you need isn't someone who moves furniture. You need someone who understands flow dynamics at a systems level. A pause. Okay. Let me look at this properly. Give me a few days. He looked at me, looked at the chair. Something flickered across his face. Not quite suspicion, not quite relief. Fine, but don't move anything else. Of course not. He left. The garage door closed. Jennifer stood in the kitchen doorway for another 3 seconds. Then she walked to the cabinet, took out a mug, and began washing it very thoroughly under the tap. Mom? What are you planning? I opened my book back to the marked page. My name is Eleanor Grant, 71 years old, retired infrastructure engineer, pipelines, overpasses, 2 interstate highway interchanges, and 1 very complicated drainage project outside of Tucson that I'm still quietly proud of. I bought this house in 2003. I paid it off in 2014. Every wall, every window, every inch of hardwood floor, mine. My son-in-law, Mark Cashman, had just told me in my own living room, in my own armchair, in my own house, that he was doing me a favor by letting me live here. I'd spent 30 years designing systems that moved things exactly where they needed to go. It was time to design one more. Jennifer, do you still have that contact at the farm supply store in Millbrook? A long pause. Why? I need to ask about goats. The mug slipped in Jennifer's hands. She caught it. About what? Specifically, Nigerian dwarf goats. I read they're excellent for indoor energy stabilization. Silence. Oh no. I'll also need about 200 feet of red ribbon and a laser level. I have my own transit, but a laser level will be faster for the interior work. Mom, you can't. He said it was his home, Jen. Jennifer put the mug down, turned around, looked at me. I turned a page. The farm store opens at 8. The farm store in Millbrook smelled like cedar shavings and something I couldn't quite identify but suspected was optimism. Dorothy Fitch, my neighbor of 16 years, owner of a reliable minivan and an absolute inability to mind her own business, had driven me out there at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning without asking a single question. This was either a testament to our friendship or evidence that she'd been waiting for something interesting to happen in my life and had decided not to jinx it. She did ask one question in the parking lot. Eleanor, are we actually buying a goat? A Nigerian dwarf. They're smaller than standard goats. That's not really the part I was asking about. I know. She looked at me for a moment. Then she got out of the car. 16 years. Should have seen this coming. The man at the farm store was named Dale, and he was the kind of person who took every question with complete seriousness regardless of context, which is exactly the kind of person you want when you're buying a goat for non-agricultural purposes. I told him I needed a Nigerian dwarf, female, calm temperament, indoor compatible. Dale didn't blink. Indoor as in barn with climate control, or indoor as in house? House. Dale nodded slowly, the way engineers nod when the specifications are unusual, but technically achievable. We've got an 8-month-old female, Clarabelle. She's house-trained, mostly. Eats pretty much anything. How do you mean, mostly? She'll use the corner you designate, long as you're consistent. But she does chew. Corners, mostly. Baseboards. She got into a throw pillow last month, but that was an isolated incident. Dorothy made a sound behind me. I'll take her. Eleanor, whose baseboards are we talking about? His. A pause. I'll help you load her up. Clarabelle arrived at the house at 10:47 and immediately ate 3 inches off the corner of the entryway rug. Not aggressively, almost thoughtfully. She chewed, looked around, chewed some more. Then she walked into the living room, located the patch of morning sunlight near my armchair, and lay down in it. I watched her for a moment. She was white with brown patches, about the size of a medium dog, and she had the specific expression of a creature that has never once doubted its right to be exactly where it was. I understood that energy completely. Jennifer came home for lunch. She worked from home 3 days a week, office 2, a schedule that had always struck me as a reasonable compromise and now struck me as extremely convenient, and stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at Clarabelle, looked at me. Mom? She's a Nigerian dwarf, 8 months old. Her name is Clarabelle. There is a goat in our living room. Your father always said a house needed more life in it. Dad said we should get a house plant. Tomato, tomato. Jennifer sat down at the kitchen table very carefully, the way you sit when your legs have stopped trusting you. Mark is going to lose his mind. Mark gave me permission. What? I opened the drawer next to the refrigerator and produced my phone, pulled up the text thread. I had texted Mark at 8:52 that morning. For the energy stabilization work I'm doing, I'll need to bring in a live grounding element, organic bioelectric anchor. Is that all right? Mark had responded at 9:04. Sure, whatever you need. Jennifer read it twice. Organic bioelectric anchor. Accurate description. Mom, that's precise terminology. I looked it up. Jennifer looked at the phone, looked at Clarabelle, who had relocated to the base of Mark's armchair and was investigating the upholstery fringe with professional interest. "He said, whatever you need." He did. I'm not going to be able to keep a straight face tonight. You won't need to. Go make yourself a sandwich, Jen. I have work to do. The red ribbon came from a craft store on Route 9, 215 feet of it, 3/8 of an inch wide, the specific shade that a color chart would call vermilion and that I would call visible. I also bought a laser level, a box of removable adhesive strips rated for hardwood and drywall, a pad of graph paper, and a set of colored markers. At the register, the teenage cashier looked at my cart with the expression of someone trying to work out the story. "Making something?" "A flow system." She nodded like this was a normal answer. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with the graph paper and made a proper drawing. Not a sketch, a drawing, to scale. Room by room, wall by wall, every doorway and window and permanent fixture marked precisely. Gerald's old drafting ruler, his compass, the drafting kind, not the magnetic kind, though I'd be using one of those too. I worked for 2 hours. When I was done, I had a complete diagram of the house's energy flow network, and it was, I have to say, genuinely beautiful. The red lines moved through the space with real logic. Not feng shui logic, which as far as I could tell was mostly aesthetic preference dressed in directional vocabulary. Structural logic, the kind that accounts for traffic patterns, load distribution, and, this was my own addition, what I labeled on the diagram as friction nodes. The friction nodes were where I planned to put the ribbon. The principle was simple. In any system, you optimize flow by identifying where movement is most frequently interrupted and redesigning the path. Mark moved through this house with the confidence of ownership. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway to his home office. His morning route was as predictable as a pipeline survey. Garage door, kitchen coffee, living room chair review, home office. I was going to redesign his route. Not to block it, just to redirect it. Slightly, repeatedly, with increasing specificity. Jennifer appeared in the doorway around 2 p.m, looked at the diagram spread across the kitchen table, and stood there for a long moment. "Is that our house?" To scale, I used the original floor plan from the county assessor's office. They have them online now. "You pulled the county assessor records." "For accuracy." Jennifer sat down, studied the diagram. Her finger traced one of the red lines. It ran from the front door diagonally across the living room to the kitchen doorway, about 8 inches off the floor, exactly at shin height for a man of Mark's build. "Mom, is this ribbon at shin level?" For the lower register channels, yes. Energy flows at different heights. The wealth channels run mid-room, roughly waist level. The grounding channels run lower. And Mark is what, 5'11"? 6 feet even. I measured the door frames when we moved in. Standard clearance. Jennifer looked at the diagram for another moment. The friction nodes. High interference areas, where the energy tends to snag. You labeled them friction nodes on a diagram you're going to show my husband? If he asks to see the documentation, yes. Jennifer pressed her lips together very firmly. Her shoulders moved once. "This is not funny, Jen." "No, absolutely not." "It's a precision remediation project." Jennifer stood up quickly, walked to the counter, and developed a sudden, urgent interest in unloading the dishwasher. "When are you putting it up?" "Tomorrow morning, before he leaves for work." I have a Zoom call at 8. Keep your camera on. I'll be in the background. The dishwasher rack clattered. Oh, this is going to be so good. Mark came home at 6:15. I was in my armchair, where I'd moved it by the window because that was where it belonged. Clarabelle was at the base of his armchair. She'd been there most of the afternoon, as if she'd made a territorial assessment and rendered judgment. Mark walked in from the garage, set his briefcase down in the kitchen, loosened his tie. Regular sounds, regular rhythm. Then he walked into the living room. He saw the goat. The goat looked at him. 10 seconds passed. Eleanor. There is a goat in the living room. That's Clarabelle. She's the organic bioelectric anchor I mentioned. You said organic bioelectric anchor. That's what she is. Nigerian dwarf. Excellent grounding properties. The bioelectric field generated by ruminant digestion is particularly effective at neutralizing static charge in high-flow energy zones. Silence. Mark looked at his phone, scrolled up, read his own response. He looked at Clarabelle. Clarabelle looked at him. She was chewing something. It appeared to be a small piece of the armchair fringe. She's eating my chair. She's processing ambient energy. The fringe was likely accumulating stagnant charge. The fringe was stagnant charge. It's actually a good sign. She's working. Mark stood very still. I could see him doing the calculation, the same calculation he'd been doing for 14 months every time I said something that sounded reasonable enough that he couldn't argue with it without contradicting his own system. The problem with building a belief structure out of vocabulary rather than evidence is that the vocabulary can be borrowed. I'd been an engineer for 30 years. I had a lot of vocabulary. How long does she need to be here? Until the stabilization is complete. A few weeks, I'd estimate. It depends on how disrupted the baseline field is. A few weeks. Could be less. Hard to say before I get the ribbon system calibrated. The ribbon system. I'm installing it tomorrow morning, mapping the primary flow channels. Once I have a clear picture of the current versus the optimal path, I can give you a better timeline. Mark looked at me. Looked at Clarabelle, looked at the graph paper diagram I'd left, apparently casually, on the side table next to my chair. He picked it up. He studied it for almost a full minute. These are the flow channels. Primary and secondary. Red is active flow, blue is the proposed optimization path. The dotted lines are interference zones. That's where your current furniture placement is creating back pressure. Back pressure. Against the wealth flow axis. You're actually running counter to it in 3 zones. I'm surprised your practitioner didn't catch that. Mark looked at the diagram for another long moment. He didn't say anything. He put the diagram back on the table, picked up his briefcase, went upstairs. Jennifer appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds later, wooden spoon in hand, eyes very bright. I'm surprised your practitioner didn't catch that. It's a legitimate observation. He took the bait. He looked at the diagram for 58 seconds. I counted. Jennifer pointed the wooden spoon at me. You are terrifying. I'm an engineer. We iterate. The ribbon went up at 7:15 the next morning, while Mark was in the shower. I'd been up since 5:30. Coffee, diagram review, measurements confirmed against the floor plan. By 6:45, I had the adhesive strips placed, low on the baseboards, where the paint was already a little scuffed and nobody would notice the difference. By 7:10, I had the first run stretched across the living room. Vermilion ribbon, 3/8 of an inch wide, 8 inches off the floor, anchored clean and taut from the base of the bookshelf to the leg of the console table near the window. Jennifer came downstairs at 7:05 in her bathrobe, saw me on one knee next to the baseboard with a laser level, and walked directly back upstairs without saying a word. She came back down 10 minutes later, fully dressed, coffee in hand. How many? 11 in the living room, 4 in the hallway, 2 across the kitchen doorway. Those are higher, about knee level, for the secondary channel. Knee level. The wealth channels run higher. The grounding channels are lower. The secondary integration channels are mid-register. It's a 3-tier system. Jennifer looked at the living room. The ribbons caught the morning light. They were genuinely quite striking, an organized geometry of red lines running at precise angles through the familiar space, turning the room into something between a floor plan and a laser security grid. It looks like a museum heist. It looks like a properly calibrated flow network. Mom, he has to walk through this to get to the kitchen. There's a clear path along the north wall, 42 inches wide, wider than standard ADA clearance, perfectly navigable. Along the north wall. That's the primary flow corridor. It would be counterproductive to obstruct it. Jennifer looked at the north wall path. It was indeed clear, a narrow channel that ran from the hallway entrance to the kitchen doorway, hugging the bookshelf and requiring approximately 2 sideways steps to navigate the corner by the lamp. He's going to have to turn sideways at the lamp. The lamp is on a node junction. You don't walk through a node junction. You navigate around it. That's basic flow management. The shower upstairs went off. Jennifer grabbed her coffee with both hands and sat down at the kitchen table facing away from the living room, which told me everything I needed to know about her commitment to keeping a straight face. Mark came downstairs at 7:38. I heard him before I saw him, the usual heavy step on the stairs, the particular sound of a confident man's mourning. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Eleanor. Good morning. The north wall path is clear. That's your primary corridor. Stay between the bookshelf and the lamp, then angle left at the kitchen doorway. I've marked the node junction with a small flag. I had, in fact, marked the node junction with a small flag, a yellow sticky note on the lamp base that said, Node Junction, navigate around, in neat block letters. You put a flag on my lamp. For clarity, it's a dense section. 3 channels converge there. I didn't want you to disrupt the calibration before it stabilizes. Mark stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at his living room. The morning light was coming through the windows at a low angle, and the ribbons cast thin red shadows across the hardwood floor. Clarabelle was in her morning spot, base of his armchair, and looked up at him with the serene indifference of a creature that has assessed the situation and found it satisfactory. How long is this up? Until the calibration is complete. I told you, a few weeks, possibly less, depending on how the field responds. I have people coming over on Thursday. What kind of people? Business people, a client dinner. That's actually ideal timing. The wealth channels will be at peak activation by Thursday. The first 72 hours are the critical alignment window. Your clients will be walking directly through a fully optimized flow network. That's a significant advantage. Silence. Mark looked at the ribbons, looked at my diagram, which was still on the side table, looked at me. A significant advantage. Energetically speaking, obviously I can't quantify it precisely, but your own practitioner would tell you the same thing. Probably. Mark picked up the diagram again. He stood there in his suit with his briefcase and studied it. The red lines, the blue proposed paths, the friction nodes labeled in my neat drafting print, the small triangles I'd used to mark the node junctions. These percentages next to the friction nodes. Estimated flow reduction. The northeast corner is running at about 34% efficiency based on the current furniture layout. That's the corner where your desk faces the window. My home office desk. The window orientation puts you in direct counterflow. You're working against the primary wealth axis for, I'd estimate, 6 to 8 hours a day. That's significant accumulated resistance over time. A very long pause. Can that be corrected? I've made a note on the diagram, page 2. There was a page 2. I'd added it at 5:45 that morning. It showed the home office with proposed furniture adjustments. Desk rotated 45 degrees, bookshelf relocated, small crystal placement suggestions borrowed from the feng shui book I'd bought at the craft store, which I had read cover to cover and found to be mostly interior design with aspirational vocabulary. Mark looked at page 2 for a long time. This is actually, the desk rotation makes sense, energetically. I thought so too. He put the diagram down, navigated the north wall corridor, turned sideways at the lamp exactly as I'd described, angled left at the kitchen doorway, poured his coffee, and left for work. The garage door closed. Jennifer turned around from the kitchen table. Her face had achieved a kind of controlled anguish, the expression of a person who has been holding something in for an extended period and is not entirely sure they can continue. He turned sideways at the lamp. The node junction is clearly marked. He said the desk rotation makes sense energetically. It does make sense, just not for the reason he thinks. The window glare is genuinely bad for screen work. Jennifer made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob and was entirely undignified. You gave him a page 2. Documentation is important, you know that. She pressed her hands over her face. I have a Zoom call in 20 minutes and my eyes are going to be red. Splash cold water. You'll be fine. The Thursday dinner was for 4 people. Mark, a man named Greg Holloway who ran a fleet management company, Greg's business partner whose name I didn't catch, and Greg's wife, Sandra, who within 6 minutes of arriving had touched every crystal in the living room and asked where Mark had found his energy person. This layout is incredible. The flow in here is just... You can feel it, can't you, Greg? Greg Holloway looked like a man who had been dragged to many seminars and had learned to nod. Definitely something going on. Who did this? Was it the woman from Sedona? Because this is Sedona-level work. Mark opened his mouth, closed it, looked at me. I was in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel, having just helped Jennifer carry out the appetizers. My mother-in-law, actually, Eleanor, she has a background in systems engineering. Sandra turned to me with the expression of a person who has found their spiritual equal at an unexpected location. Oh my God! A systems approach to energy work. That is so advanced. Most practitioners are still thinking linearly. Are you taking clients? I'm retired. I would pay so much money for a consultation. Our house in Westport, the flow is just completely blocked. We've had 3 different people in and nobody can figure it out. What's the orientation of the main entrance? Sandra blinked. It faces northeast, I think. And where does the primary traffic pattern run from the entrance? Straight through to the kitchen. That's a classic compression corridor. You're funneling all your incoming flow into one linear path with no distribution nodes. Everything stacks up at the kitchen and goes nowhere. You need lateral channels, probably off the entry hall, redirecting flow into the living spaces before it hits the kitchen bottleneck. Sandra stared at me. That is exactly what it feels like. It feels like everything stacks up at the kitchen. It's a common layout issue. It was. I'd written a technical memo about traffic flow compression in residential construction in 2007. The principle was identical. The vocabulary was different. Mark was watching me from across the room with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite suspicion and sat right in the uncomfortable middle. Greg Holloway leaned over to his business partner. I like her. Jennifer, passing with a tray of bruschetta, caught my eye over Greg's shoulder. She raised her eyebrows exactly once. I went back to the kitchen. The morning routine developed its own rhythm over the following week, the way all systems do once the initial variables are established. Mark navigated the north wall corridor every morning. He'd stopped hesitating at the lamp. Muscle memory had taken over, and he moved around the node junction with the automatic fluency of a person who has accepted a new traffic pattern. He'd also rotated his desk. I could hear it when he was on calls in the afternoon. The acoustics changed slightly when he moved to the window-facing orientation. Better for him, genuinely. The glare had been bad. Clarabelle had eaten 14 inches of baseboard in the second bedroom. I considered this a reasonable cost of operations. What I hadn't anticipated, and this was the variable that serious engineers account for by building in tolerance margins because you always miss something, was Dorothy. Dorothy Fitch came over for coffee on the 9th day, as she did most Thursdays, and walked into the living room and stood very still for a moment. Eleanor. I know. Is that a goat? Bioelectric anchor. Her name is Clarabelle. Dorothy sat down, looked at the ribbons, looked at Clarabelle, looked at the diagram on the side table, which had by now acquired 2 additional pages and several color-coded annotations. How long has this been going on? 11 days. And Mark. He rotated his desk on day 4. He's been navigating the corridor correctly since day 3. He mentioned to Jennifer yesterday that the house feels different. The house feels different. Probably because he's doing lateral movement through the living room every morning instead of walking straight through. It's 15 extra steps. The physical pattern creates a perception shift, entirely explainable. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, what is the end game here? I poured her coffee, set it down. He told me this was his home. I see. 22 years I've lived in this house. I paid off the mortgage in 2014. I have the deed in a fireproof box in the closet of the room where I sleep, which is the room I chose when I moved in, not the room that was assigned to me. I know, Eleanor. I have been patient with the crystals. I have been patient with the compasses. I moved my husband's awards from the wall because he asked me to, and I thought that was a reasonable accommodation between people who are sharing a space. Then he told me I was a guest in my own house, and the patience ran out. Dorothy looked at her coffee for a moment. What are you actually going to do? I'm going to make him deeply uncomfortable in a way he cannot argue with using his own belief system as the mechanism until he either apologizes or leaves. And if he does neither? I looked at the diagram, at the clean red lines moving through the rooms I knew by heart, the slightly uneven floorboard near the kitchen door, the window in the living room that's stuck in humid weather, the smell of the upstairs hallway that was just slightly different from every other house I'd ever been in, and that I had never been able to explain and had never wanted to. Then I escalate. Dorothy picked up her coffee. Do you need anything? I may need the minivan again. I'll keep the tank full. The compass requirement came on day 14, and I want to be clear that it was not my most proportionate decision. But proportionality, as any engineer will tell you, is a design constraint, not a moral absolute. Sometimes you overspec to account for unknown loads. Mark had been complaining for 3 days about a deal that kept not closing. Same pattern every evening. Came home frustrated, walked the corridor, checked in with Clarabelle. This had become somehow a thing he did. He would stand near her for about 30 seconds before going to change out of his suit. And I had a theory about why, but kept it to myself. Then went to his office and worked until 9. On the 14th morning, I caught him before he left. Mark, before you go, I want to try something. A morning calibration. Just takes a minute. He looked at his watch. What kind of calibration? I've been monitoring the field readings, and I think there's a residual interference pattern that's affecting your outgoing energy. It resets overnight, but you're leaving the house before it fully clears. If you take 30 seconds at the node junction to orient yourself, magnetic north, then 90 degrees clockwise, it should clear the residual, and you'll go into the day fully aligned. Mark looked at me. Magnetic north. I produced Gerald's compass, small, brass, accurate to within half a degree. I'd had it for 40 years. Gerald had used it on survey work, and I'd kept it the way I kept all his tools, which was in good working order, because that's how you honor a thing. Mark took it, turned it in his hands, and I just stand at the junction, face north, hold the compass flat, count to 15, then turn clockwise to east, hold another 15, then you're calibrated. He looked at the compass, looked at the lamp, looked at me. He walked to the node junction. He stood there, in his good suit, briefcase in hand, holding a brass compass flat on his palm, facing the bookshelf, which was, in fact, approximately north. I watched him count. Jennifer was at the kitchen table. She had both hands wrapped around her coffee mug and was looking out the window at the backyard with the focused intensity of a person who has made a firm decision about something and is committing to it completely. Her shoulders were absolutely still. Mark turned 90 degrees. Held. Good. How do you feel? Clearer, actually. It was not a miraculous phenomenon. He'd been standing still for 30 seconds and breathing slowly. Almost anyone feels marginally clearer after 30 seconds of standing still and breathing slowly. This is just physiology. Good. That's the residual clearing. Go close your deal. He handed back the compass, navigated the rest of the corridor, left. The garage door closed. Jennifer turned from the window. Her face was completely composed except for one thing. Her right hand was pressed flat against the table and the knuckles were white. He said he felt clearer. He stood still for 30 seconds. You made my husband stand at a lamp with a compass. I suggested it. He chose to do it. Mom. He's going to do that every morning now. Probably. Jennifer stood up, walked to the refrigerator, opened it, closed it without taking anything out. I actually think the deal might close. The ritual creates a pause before he goes into the day, reduces the scattered energy he was carrying from the morning. He'll probably make better decisions. You're accidentally helping him. Good engineering benefits everyone in the system. That's not an accident. That's a feature, a pause. Is any part of this actually working? The ribbons, the goat? Clarabelle has eaten 4 feet of baseboard in the second bedroom, which will require repainting. The ribbon system has altered his morning movement pattern, which has measurably reduced the rushed, high cortisol energy he used to bring into the kitchen. The compass calibration is giving him a 30-second mindfulness practice he didn't know he needed. So you built him a wellness routine. I built him a cage made of his own beliefs. The wellness is incidental. Jennifer looked at me for a long moment. You're the scariest person I've ever met. You say that like it's a bad thing. The deal closed on day 16. Mark came home at 5:47, early for him, and I heard the garage door and then footsteps that were different from the usual ones. Lighter, the specific cadence of a man who has had a good day and knows it. He came into the living room, stood at the corridor entrance, looked at the ribbons with an expression I hadn't seen before, something almost fond. Eleanor. The Holloway account came through. Full fleet contract. 32 vehicles, maintenance package, 2-year term. Congratulations. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked the corridor, turned at the lamp, angled left, and poured himself a celebratory bourbon instead of his usual post-work water. You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about the counterflow in the office. The window orientation. Yeah, I rotated the desk and, I don't know. I know you probably think the whole system is... He stopped. Do you think it works? Any of it? I looked up from my book. This was a question that deserved a real answer, not a tactical one. I think ritual creates structure. I think structure creates consistency. I think consistency creates results. Whether the energy is the mechanism or the behavior change is the mechanism, I'm not sure it matters to the outcome. Mark held his bourbon and thought about this for a while. That's actually, yeah. You're a good salesman, Mark. You always were. You just needed to stop scattering your attention every morning before you left the house. A silence. It wasn't a hostile silence. That was new. The compass thing. 30 seconds. Every morning, you reset. My dad used to make me stop at the door before school. Said you couldn't leave the house in a hurry. Had to stand still for a minute first. Smart man. He was. He finished his bourbon, stood up, looked at Clarabelle, who was in her usual position at the base of his armchair, apparently asleep. Does she actually do anything, the goat? She eats the baseboards in the second bedroom. That's it? That's enough. He laughed. It was short and a little confused and entirely genuine. Maybe the first genuine thing I'd heard from him in 14 months. He went upstairs. I sat with that for a moment. The evening light was coming through my window at the angle I liked. The armchair was exactly where it belonged. Clarabelle breathed slowly at the far end of the room. I turned a page. The thing about engineering is that you design for the load that's actually there, not the load you wish were there, not the load you're afraid of. You measure what exists and you build accordingly. Mark Cashman was not a villain. He was a man who had found a language for his anxiety and built his whole domestic life around it. And somewhere in that process had started to believe that the house was his because he was the one managing the invisible forces inside it. He was wrong about the forces. He was wrong about the house. He wasn't wrong that the morning ritual helped. He wasn't wrong that the desk orientation was better. He wasn't wrong that something in the house felt different. The house felt different because I'd stopped letting him manage it. I noted this in my project log, which was a real document, spiral-bound, sitting on my nightstand, under the heading, Day 16, System Responding as Designed. Then I wrote, underneath, Phase 2 Pending. Phase 2 had not, in fact, been planned. It arrived on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks into the project, in the form of a man named Brad Kowalski, who pulled up to the house in a white Subaru with a small crystal hanging from the rearview mirror and a business card that read, Brad Kowalski, Energetic Architecture and Spatial Optimization Consulting. Mark had mentioned 2 days earlier that his practitioner was coming to do a quarterly audit. I had noted this in the project log and written, Variable Incoming, Assess and Adapt. Brad Kowalski was about 40, with the particular energy of a person who had once worked in sales and had found a product he genuinely believed in, which made him simultaneously more pleasant and more dangerous than a pure, cynical operator. He shook my hand at the door and looked around the entryway with bright, attentive eyes. Then he stopped. He looked at the living room, the ribbons, the diagram on the side table. Clarabelle, who had relocated that morning to the hallway and was sitting next to the node junction lamp with the authority of a small, patchy sentinel. Brad looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he said, Who did this? Mark opened his mouth. Is this the Bagua overlay, or are you working from a different directional framework? Because these channel lines, he walked into the room, following a ribbon with his eyes from anchor to anchor. These are running on actual compass bearings. Most residential work I see is approximate. This is, he stopped at the node junction, looked at the lamp, looked at the yellow flag. Node junction, navigate around, which was still there because I saw no reason to remove it. This is surveyed. It is. He turned around, looked at me properly for the first time. You're the systems engineer. Retired, 30 years infrastructure. Roads and pipelines. Mostly, some drainage, one bridge. Brad nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man reassessing a situation in real time, not defensive, just recalibrating. A credit to him, honestly. The channel bearings. You actually compass surveyed the rooms. I used a transit and a laser level. The compass is for the morning calibration work, different application. And the grounding element, he looked at Clarabelle. Is that a Nigerian dwarf? 8 months. Her name is Clarabelle. I have never seen a live grounding element in a residential installation. The bioelectric field from ruminant digestion is effective for neutralizing static charge in high-flow zones. I'm sure you're familiar with the principle. Brad looked at me for a long moment. He was trying to work something out. I could see him doing it, running the calculation behind his eyes. Engineer, retirement age, goat, surveyed ribbon system, son-in-law who believed in wealth flow axes. He was close. Not quite there. How long have you been working with this system? I came to it recently. My son-in-law introduced me to the framework. I found my existing skill set transferred well. Brad looked at Mark. Mark was standing near the kitchen doorway with his arms folded and an expression that I recognized as the particular pride of a man who has discovered that his overlooked family member is impressive and is recalibrating how much credit he deserves for noticing. Mark, you have one of the most precisely calibrated residential installations I've seen outside of a dedicated commercial space. I came to do a quarterly audit. He paused. I don't have a lot to audit. Mark blinked. You don't? The channel alignment is within a degree of optimal on every primary axis. The node junction management is correct. Most installations ignore junction navigation entirely. That's where you lose 40% of your flow gains. The directional calibration work, he glanced at me, is being done properly. I'd tighten the east wall secondary channel by about 4 inches, but that's a refinement, not a correction. He looked at me again. 4 inches east on the secondary, the anchor point at the baseboard near the window. I'll note that. Are you? He stopped, started again. I consult for a couple of commercial clients in Westport and Greenwich. New builds mostly, some renovation work. The spatial analysis component is always the weak point. I know the system, but I'm not a structural engineer. If you were ever interested in a collaborative arrangement, I'm retired. I know, but retired people sometimes find that one project leads to another. I thought of Sandra Holloway, her compression corridor, the stacked flow at the kitchen bottleneck. I'll think about it. Mark was very quiet on Brad's way out. He walked him to the door. They talked for a few minutes in the driveway, and then Mark came back in and stood in the living room in the specific posture of a man who has had something reorganized inside him and isn't sure yet what the new configuration looks like. He looked at the ribbons, looked at Clarabelle, looked at the diagram. He said it was one of the best installations he'd seen. He's the expert. I defer to his assessment. Eleanor, you... He stopped, tried again. You actually learned the system? I approached it as an engineering problem. That's what I know how to do. I said your brain was stuck in old blueprints. You did. A long silence. Mark sat down, not in his armchair. Clarabelle was there, and he'd stopped trying to reclaim it about a week ago, which I considered a significant symbolic development. He sat on the couch, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I also said this was my home. You did. It's not. No. I think I was scared. After the Holloway deal fell through the first time, and then the quarter before was bad, and I kept looking I needed something to be in control of. The energy work gave me a framework, and the framework needed someone to blame when things went wrong. And you were there. He said this to the floor mostly, the way people say things they've been carrying for a while and have finally decided to put down somewhere. I let it sit for a moment. Mark, this is my house. I bought it. I paid for it. I will be buried from it, same as Gerald. That doesn't change. I know. But you're also my daughter's husband, and you closed the Holloway account. And you have, whether you intended to or not, made some genuinely useful modifications to your morning routine. He looked up. The compass thing, the 30 seconds. Your father was right. He was quiet for a moment. Clarabelle shifted in the armchair, sighed heavily, and went back to sleep. The sound was absurdly domestic. Can the goat stay? I looked at Clarabelle. She had eaten 11 feet of baseboard across 2 rooms. She had consumed a throw pillow corner, 4 inches of entryway rug, and what appeared to be a portion of a phone charger cable that I'd decided not to investigate too closely. She slept in the best sunspot in the house with the confidence of an animal that has correctly identified where it belongs. She stays. Jennifer found out about the conversation secondhand. Mark told her that evening, apparently at some length, and came to find me the next morning while I was having my coffee. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, looked at me for a moment. He apologized. He explained. That's different. The apology was in there, but it wasn't the main thing. What was the main thing? He was scared and he needed something to manage. The energy system gave him that, and when it didn't work, he needed someone to have moved the wrong thing. Jennifer turned her coffee mug in her hands. I should have said something earlier when he moved Dad's awards. You were protecting your marriage. That's not nothing. It felt like choosing sides. It is choosing sides, Jen. That's all right. You're supposed to choose his side, mostly. I'm your mother. I don't need you to fight my battles. I need you to not pretend the battles aren't happening. She looked at the table for a moment. Did you know this was going to work when you bought the ribbon? I thought about it honestly. I knew I was going to do something. I didn't know what it would produce. In engineering, you design the system and then you run it and you see what the load does. The load was Mark. I didn't know Mark as well as I thought I did. And now? Now I know he's a man who misses his father and gets scared when money is bad and handles both of those things poorly. That's not interesting. That's just a person. Jennifer was quiet. Brad Kowalski called this morning. Asked if you'd look at a property in Greenwich. I know, he left a voicemail. And? I looked out the window. The backyard was November bare. The oak Gerald had planted the year Jennifer was born, now taller than the second floor. The morning light was doing what it always did at this time of year, coming in low and flat, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been considered carefully. I told him I'd come take a look. Jennifer smiled, just slightly. The compression corridor lady. Sandra Holloway has a legitimate spatial flow problem. It happens to be structural, not energetic, but the solution is the same either way. You redistribute the load, you create lateral paths, you prevent the bottleneck. You're going to keep doing this. I'm retired. I have time. Mom. He moved Dad's awards back up last night while I was making dinner. He didn't say anything about it. I looked at my coffee. I noticed. We sat with that for a while. Clarabelle came in from the hallway, located the patch of morning sunlight near my armchair, and lay down in it. The house settled around her, the familiar sounds of it, the slightly uneven floorboard near the door, the oak tree visible through the window, the particular quality of the light that I had never been able to explain and had never wanted to. Mine. The armchair was where I'd put it. The light came through at the angle I needed. Gerald's compass was on the side table where I'd left it after the morning calibration, brass going warm in the sun. I opened my book. Some systems you build to move things. Some you build to hold them in place. The best ones do both.